Hello, this is Rodd Moesel with Oklahoma Farm Bureau, and it's a delight to join you again this evening. And we're continuing our discussions that we've been doing in our regular webinars with opinion leaders in our state that to get their insight and to get to know them better. And tonight we're very excited to have with us our newest congressman from the state of Oklahoma, Stephanie Bice. Congresswoman Bice has been familiar with Farm Bureau in her time in the state Senate, and we've enjoyed a good relationship with her there and have gotten to know her. And she was involved in, depending on whether you believe Real Clear Politics or Politico or which deal, the hottest congressional race in the whole United States, or some people had it number 2 or number 3, but everybody had it as one of the 3 most competitive races in the whole 435 seats of the U.S. Congress. So we're delighted to welcome Stephanie Bice as our newest Congresswoman, and we may have a small delegation with just 5 members, but we think we've got the best delegation in the whole country. It's amazing the talent that's in that group, and you're already starting to get to know those people. Have you got any early impressions of your fellow congressmen or how things have gotten off to a start with them?
You know, first of all, the delegation has just been incredible to me. As a matter of fact, the night after the election, I was invited to dinner at the governor's mansion with the delegation just to sit and listen to some of the things that are happening and conversations that are going on around issues. And so it was fun to be a part of that. And as Congressman Lucas says, it's nice to have my fellow colleague sitting with us at dinner tonight. So I'm looking forward to working with them and excited for the opportunity.
Well, and I think both of our senators and all 4 of the other congressmen really stepped out on the line to help you in the election cycle, as I recall. So.
They really did. And you know, you mentioned this being one of the most competitive races in the country. I don't think most people may know that this race ended up being a total spend of about $20 million on both sides, with the independent expenditures that came in, with the candidates' fundraising capabilities. It was the most expensive House race in Oklahoma ever. And many people joked that we had seen so many commercials with my opponent and I that we should be folding people's laundry in their living room because we had been in their living room so much for those last few weeks before the election.
I think to that point of how much your identity went up, you were just telling us before we started today about going to Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
You might just share that fun little story about what it was like to go through the drive-thru.
It's a little strange for me to go to places and people recognize me, and I happened to be in the Chick-fil-A drive-thru the other day, and I was even wearing a mask, and the gentleman said, "Can I have your name?" And I said, "Stephanie," and he said, "Are you Stephanie Bice?" And I started laughing, and I said, "I am." He said, "We voted for you," and I said, "Well, thanks so much." So it's a little bit of a surreal experience for me to be recognized in and around the community, but I think when you have so much money spent on television, that tends to happen.
Well, after surviving all those ads here in Oklahoma, since I live in the Oklahoma City media market, and it seemed like there were hardly ads for anything else except you or Kendra Horn, and or somebody else opinionating on you or Kendra Horn. Yeah. I can't hardly imagine what it's like to be in Georgia right now with 2 U.S. Senate races that decide the U.S. Senate going simultaneously, and they're talking about $1 billion.
It's incredible,
spending
isn't it?
in 6 weeks or something. I just can't imagine what that must be like.
Well, and I think the other sort of interesting dynamic for me was that there was an outside group that decided to come in and spend money against me, even in the primary and the runoff election. So I really spent, 5 months trying to defend myself with votes I'd taken in the Senate or issues that I had championed. So they started early, I think, trying to go after me, and fortunately it wasn't successful. So,
well, let's go back a little bit. A lot of folks have seen you in those ads and have heard about you, and they learned some about your opinions on issues because of the debates and news coverage. But a lot of folks didn't have the chance to have you as a state senator, as I did, and so they don't know as much about you. So can you maybe tell us where you grew up and where you graduated from high school, and tell us a little bit about the old history of Stephanie Bice.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised right here in the Oklahoma City metro area. Graduated from Putnam City Original High School. And the joke that I shared on the campaign trail was the school colors of Putnam City Original are orange and black. And I liked the school colors so much that I stuck with them, and I went north to Oklahoma State University. And while I was there, I met a nice guy and married him. My husband Jeff and I will be married 25 years next month. And we are blessed to have 2 daughters. Our oldest is a sophomore at Oklahoma State studying mechanical and aerospace. and our younger daughter is a junior in high school, so we're looking at the college landscape right now for her.
OSU.
Well, that's definitely an option for sure. We'll see how things play out. But she's almost been raised on the Oklahoma State campus. When she was little, we would go to tailgate, football games and basketball games, and just go to Stillwater for homecoming walk around. And so she's pretty familiar with that campus. And I was in a sorority. My husband's in a fraternity, and so she's familiar with the Greek system. So we'll see. But I was in the private sector for 20 years. I actually was in sales and marketing, which was my background. I had my own business for a while. I worked for the family business. My father had started a tech company out of New York, actually. I worked remotely for him and never thought about running for public office before until 2013.
Well, you might tell us about how did that come up? That was a Senate seat that came vacant, and it was from a part of town where there's a lot of folks that are interested in politics. So you might describe, why did you decide to run for the state Senate, and describe how many folks got in that race and how that race unfolded a little bit.
Sure. Well, it was interesting. I had befriended the gentleman that was the sitting senator at the time. His wife and I were good friends, and so I started watching state politics a little closer. I had never paid attention to state politics before. I think most people see federal politics and on the news and pay a lot of attention to that, but they don't really pay attention to state issues as much. And so I started following it and asking a lot of questions. And one day in November of 2013, I get a phone call from the gentleman, and he said, "I've decided not to run for re-election, and I think you should run for my state Senate seat." And I said, "I'm not a politician. I'm a business owner, and I have no experience in running for office." And he actually said, "I know that, but you've done a lot of things in the community." I had championed some big causes and done a lot of work on the nonprofit side. He said, "You're a doer. I see you getting out there and really making a difference for the community." And he said, I know you can do that for the state of Oklahoma." He also said something that really stuck with me, and that was, we didn't have enough women serving in the state legislature at the time. When I ran, there were 6 women out of 48 in the state Senate, and 13 out of 101 in the state House. So 19 women out of 149 seats. And my joke is that we were 49th in a lot of other things, and maybe there was a correlation, maybe not. But as the mom of daughters, I thought it was an opportunity for me to do something big and bold and outside the box. And so I ran for the Senate seat in 2014, had a 3-way primary election, which lent itself to a runoff. No one got the 50% plus one, so had a runoff election in August of 14, and there was no Democrat that filed, so I was actually elected state senator in August of 14. And it's been an incredible experience. Was up for re-election in November of 18, and won my re-elect by the largest number of votes of any state legislator in Oklahoma. And that was the same night we lost the congressional seat to Kinder Horn.
And I happened to have been there that night, and I know somebody spoke to you that night. Not me. I waited till the next day. But I know there were people that night talking to you about this congressional seat and the effort to win this congressional seat back for a more conservative philosophy. So
absolutely, and it was a little jarring to me. I had a couple people approach me and say, "Hey, are you ready to run for Congress?" And I said, "I just won my Senate seat back. What are you talking about?" And it took some conversations, certainly with my family and discernment, to make the decision to run. It's a much bigger stage, a lot more at stake, and so I wanted to make sure it was right for me and my family.
Let's go back before we go to Congress completely. At State Senate, there were a number of causes you were involved in and a number of issues. Maybe shed a little light for us on what things you got involved in at the State Senate level.
Well, the first thing that I got involved in, which was sort of happenstance in some ways, was alcohol modernization. And I took that on not because it was really about alcohol. It was actually about economic development and jobs across the state of Oklahoma. My husband's a craft beer fan, and you couldn't buy cold beer in a liquor store. So the first bill that I ever filed was to allow for refrigeration of craft beer in liquor stores. And what was interesting is the industry actually came to me and said, we really need someone to champion true reform. This has been a long time coming, and we need a comprehensive overhaul. And so I spent 2 years working with Senator Clark Jolly to rewrite a part of the Constitution as well as an entire title of law to revamp our alcohol distribution and sales. And what's really neat about it is you look today and there are over 50 breweries in Oklahoma that didn't exist 4 years ago. So it's really, for me, it was a focus on the economic development aspect, not the alcohol piece, and a free market type of
so those efforts were successful enough that you convinced Jeffrey to let you run for a second term.
That is true. That is true. And then there were things like criminal justice reform, which, as you know, we've had been one of the highest per capita incarceration rates that Oklahoma has in the world, actually. And we need to be smart on crime. And so I worked with Governor Stitt and others to tackle some criminal justice reform issues. And I think people really connected with those things. Certainly I still have my conservative values and champion conservative ideas, but I also know how to get things done in a very bipartisan way.
We've talked about Jeffrey a couple of times, and so we always like to find out where almost everybody in Oklahoma has some farm or ranch ties. It's just how far back you have to go. So you actually don't have to go very far. Tell us where Jeffrey's from and about what his family does.
Yeah, so my husband's family, his mother's side is from Okarche, Oklahoma, and they have had land. His grandparents actually, great-grandparents were in the land run, claimed a lot of the land out in the Kingfisher, Okarche area, and it's sort of amazing. They still hold a lot of land out in that area. It's been passed down through generations, and a lot of farming land that they do land leases. Funny story I shared, I got to know some new neighbors of ours. This has been 20 years ago that moved in next door, and I asked the gentleman, "What do you do?" And he said, "Oh, well, I ranch and farm." And I said, "Where?" And he said, "Okarche." And I said, "Really? Do you know a Mary Schwartz?" And he sort of stopped and looked at me and said, "Mary Grellner Schwartz?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, I farm her land." And I said, "That's Jeff's grandmother." I mean, so it was this crazy connection that his parents and my in-laws had known each other for almost their whole lives. So I've learned a lot about farming and ranching from Troy, and I'm excited for the opportunity to learn more as I get into Congress.
So can Steve and I get in directly? Steve Thompson, who's head of our public policy, can we get in directly to talk to you about farm policy, or do we need to call Troy? Have Troy come talk to you about agriculture and farm policy?
No, I think he has perspective, but you will have perspective as well. So
well, we're glad to know Troy's out there, and that's a fun story. So. Well, let's jump ahead a little bit. The decision somebody had been planting the idea in your mind about running for Congress 2 years ago. Tell us how that evolved through this last 2 years, because I know from visiting with you through that time, you'd be thinking seriously about it, and then maybe it wasn't right for you and your family, and then you thought of being how did that evolve, and what caused you to decide to make the jump to get into the race?
Right after the election, as I mentioned, people had started asking me, you should run, or telling me you should run, asking, are you going to run? And so I did start doing some sort of investigation into what running a congressional race would look like. And for me, it was a really tough decision initially, because I was Senate Finance Chair. I had done some really big initiatives. I mentioned the alcohol modernization and criminal justice reform, but I've also tackled issues that dealt with like school funding. So I've had 2 state questions on 2 back-to-back ballots in 16 and 18. And I think I wondered, here I am being really effective on the state level and doing a lot of good for Oklahoma. Will I have that opportunity on the federal level? And so, originally I thought maybe this isn't the path I'm going to take. I'm doing really great work here. But after a lot of conversations with folks in looking forward and seeing what the opportunities may be ahead for making a difference for the state and the federal level, I decided in March of last year to announce that I was going to run for the Republican nomination for this congressional seat. Announced in April, and it was kind of off to the races. What was interesting is it became a pretty large primary field. There were nine of us in the primary. And none of us could have possibly imagined that we would be running a congressional race during a global pandemic. And so that really changed the dynamics of the race in March of this year, when we really had to kind of halt all campaigning and figure out how to move forward. How do you network? How do you meet people? How do you fundraise when you really can't do that in person? It posed a unique challenge. My team really stepped up to the plate and figured out ways to engage with voters and with supporters who wanted to help. We did Zoom fundraising calls. We did Zoom meet and greets. I had Facebook town hall lives that we put together, and it was successful. And I think that's one of the reasons why we were able to make it through that primary and then on to the runoff.
Did your background, one of the businesses you'd been involved in was doing social marketing and web things and so forth, as I understand it, from our visits in the past. Did that experience in that world help you with dealing with these changes in the pandemic, do you think?
Yeah, I think it really did. You know, for several years I was in the digital marketing space, and I actually managed social media for clients, and know the power that social media can harness and how you can spread that message. I hadn't really done it on the political side. I'd always done it sort of on the corporate side, but I knew there was an opportunity to be able to make sure that we were having our voice heard. And so we invested a lot in digital, as well as, you know, tried to engage people, and it was helpful for sure.
There was a time, and we'll move past the election here in a minute, but there was a time during that cycle, during the primary, where the outside group that you're referring to came in and poured just a bucket load of money of just outright attacks. And I think any objective person would say some of the charges they were making were pretty questionable. That had to be very frustrating and depressing. How did you keep your faith and stay on target through that time period?
Well, you mentioned the most important word, and that is faith. I think if you don't have a spiritual, grounding when you're running for public office, you're going to be, have a tough time, because you have to really kind of look at those things and evaluate and know what you've actually done and what's the truth. One of the most interesting things about all of those ads was one that they put out not only on television, but also a mail piece that said that I gave myself a pay raise as a state senator. And it was so egregious that a Democrat member of the Oklahoma House of Representatives posted a message on social media, on Facebook, and said, everyone knows that I support Congresswoman Horn, but this outside group that's coming in that says that Senator Bice gave herself a pay raise is blatantly false. And I appreciated that so much. She's right. We don't give ourselves a pay raise. An outside independent board does. But that was the sort of narrative they were trying to push, was sort of skewing the lines. They talked about a film tax rebate and tried to tie me to a convicted sex offender, which was incredibly offensive. And people took note and were not happy about it. So I think in some ways they actually did themselves a disservice by some of the attacks that they levied against me. It backfired.
And it looked pretty bleak there for a while, but you bounced back and prevailed in the runoff. Then had this race that everybody talked about as the most, which everybody knew all along the general election was going to be incredibly competitive, with the demographic changes that Oklahoma City's been going through in the metro area and so forth. So tell us how things worked in that general election, how you approached that, and how were you surprised at the result, or did you expect the result? How did that part play out?
Yeah, well, the general election was really a sprint to the finish. You feel like you've been in this marathon for a year and a half, and then all of a sudden it's game on, and you're moving forward at a pretty rapid pace. There was a lot of outside dollars that were being spent on the race, and I was at a really fundraising disadvantage because my opponent had been in office and been able to, in the majority in the House, and been able to fundraise a significant amount of money. So it was really incumbent upon me to do what I could to spread my message in a really effective way. As I mentioned, we did a lot of digital advertising, and we also did a lot of YouTube advertising to be able to get the message out. And I think that was helpful, certainly. We also did a lot of mail. Some pieces were a little large, and people laughed and said, am I going to have a life-size mail piece of Stephanie Bice in my mailbox next? But I think the message was what resonated with people. They knew that I had a great track record of serving in the state Senate. They knew that I was going to fight for Oklahoma in a variety of ways, and I think people took note of that. The general election, you never know how things are going to play out. If you step back to 2016, people didn't think that Donald Trump was going to win the election, and that's certainly how it played out. So you never know, even if you have the best data in the world, what voters are thinking. The one thing that we did know is that the Democrat absentee ballot numbers were significantly higher than Republicans. So as Republicans, we needed to make sure we got our base out to vote on the day of. And when the first numbers came out, which are the absentee ballot numbers, we were down pretty significantly. I want to say upwards of 15,000, 20,000 votes. And people got a little anxious and thought, gosh, we're going to get creamed. But my data guys said, hold on a minute. This is actually really good for us. Here's the numbers that we need to achieve to be able to win. And throughout the night, we just sat there and hit refresh and collected data, and you just saw those numbers slowly creep up until we ended up winning by, I think it was 13,000 plus votes.
And when you look at how there's still a couple races in the country we still don't know the results on, because there's a couple races that are under 400 votes, one that's under a dozen that are still, so 13,000.
Got a little breathing room, right?
Yeah, seems like a bunch, even though that's still a very close election.
Well, and I will say this, I've said this publicly quite a few times, and I think it's worth repeating. Our state election board is by far the best. I believe they do an incredible job of making sure Oklahoma has a safe and secure and efficient election. There's been a lot of conversation around voter ID, the voter ID law, but I think that at every step, we're making sure that every vote counts, every vote is verified, and it's an efficient process. And I give a huge shout out to the state election board and Secretary Paul Xerox for making that happen. I was asked by a national reporter a few days before the election, do you think you'll know the election results the night of? And I sort of, scratched my head and I said, well, of course I would. Why would I not? And they said, well, we know that there are some elections that won't be decided on the night of the election. You mentioned a couple that are outstanding. There's one in New York 22, Claudia Tenney, that may not be decided till February because of the counts and recounts and the legal challenges that are going back and forth. So it's tough.
You're so young, you probably don't know this history, but you know how we ended up with our scanning machines that we have now?
No.
Which I think we have the best election system in the whole country, and that goes to negotiations between Lee Slater, who was the Democrat that was the election board head, and Henry Bellman when he was in his second term, and they worked out these scanning machines where you'd still have the paper copy, but you'd have the machine counting, and that was one of the best decisions that was made out of that time period, and there have been some updates to that, but basically that change in technology from the old computer flip a toggle that you didn't know what's going on inside the machine to those scan machines where you can do a paper recount. Yeah. We, like you say, we're blessed with a system we can have a lot of confidence in.
That's exactly right. And I think the other thing that's really important, and most people wouldn't even think about this, is what we call the chain of custody of ballots. Who has physical possession of those paper ballots should there be an issue? And there's a very clear chain of custody at every level to make sure that there's no tampering with the ballots, there's no missing ballots. And so, I have a lot of confidence in Oklahoma's election system, and I hope that other states will take note of that soon.
Now that the elections has happened, we know the results. Now you and Kendra Horn have to cooperate in a new way. Is she still the sitting Congresswoman till January? Tell us a little bit about how that relationship's been since election night and how you go through this transition to make the change in congressional offices and staffing and so forth.
The night of the election, Congresswoman Horn called to concede the election, and one of the things that she said was, I want to make sure that it is a smooth transition and we do everything we can to help make that happen. And they have done that. Her and her staff have been very helpful in giving us information, providing us with resources. And so I'm very thankful for that. I think we both are the type of women that we want to make sure we're doing right for Oklahoma. And this is just another step in that process. And so we are working feverishly to identify and get office space set up here and hire staff. And we have a couple short weeks until swearing in, and then it'll be off to the races. So, but she has been helpful, and I really appreciate that on our behalf.
Yes, I'll throw this in from a Farm Bureau perspective. Representative Horn was always, we appreciated the fact she reached out to us so often, wanting input on things that related to agriculture and rural issues, knowing that those weren't necessarily her main issues, but she was very good about reaching out to us and communicating, and she saw the world through a little different lens and a little different philosophical, and so we appreciated her attitude of service and outreach, but we're concerned sometimes that her compass or philosophy was a little different, and so we're excited to have that same attitude of service and hopefully a little philosophy that probably matches up with our members and our state a little bit better.
Well, and I think I've had a great working relationship with the Oklahoma Farm Bureau in my time in the Senate, and look to people like you and others in the industry that can help give me the information and guidance. One of the things I've learned in the state Senate in my last 6 years is you are not an expert at everything. You may know enough to be dangerous, but you need to ask those folks that are really in the know and have the data to back it up to be able to make the decisions that are in the best interest of industry or the community as a whole.
Now you're elected. You've got all this, suddenly you've got this date in January, you move into office. I've had a lot of people ask when they knew we were going to talk to you, ask her what the heck happens from election night until you actually become the Congresswoman. What are the kinds of things that, what fills your time? Are there classes, or do you, what goes on?
Well, this fills this fills some time, right? It's been a whirlwind, and I think my response is a couple of things. First of all, most people don't recognize that you are elected on November 3rd and you are sworn in January 3rd. So you have 60 days to stand up 2 offices, hire a staff for each of those offices, find a place to live or lay your head in DC when you're there. Oh, by the way, there's a couple of major holidays thrown into the mix. So it's been a little...
And COVID.
And COVID. We're dealing with the COVID issues. So it's been a whirlwind. I was in DC on November the 12th, so just 9 days after the election. Was there for 8 days doing new member orientation, meeting my classmates. It's an incredible freshman class. And so getting to know them, and then learning all about the process and new member orientation. So some of it's your standard HR issues, but then ethics rules and guidelines and understanding GAO and how things work on their end, and CAO. I'm learning all the acronyms, by the way, too.
Do they give you a dictionary?
They should, because I was at a military base too earlier this week, and it's the same scenario. I feel like acronyms are being thrown at me all the time. But that was really the first week, and then the second came home for Thanksgiving, and then I went back for another week, and a lot of that was spent. Office lottery was part of that, but also getting to hire staff or interview staff that you may be considering. And so it's really been a very busy time. And then certainly you have lots of people that are reaching out that want to make some introductions, get to know you.
People like us that want to get you on film.
That's exactly. I've done a lot of Zoom calls and a lot of camera interviews to get out in front of folks, and a lot of national media. One of the things that you're. Well,
let's butt in before you go off on this.
Okay.
You talked about the big freshman class.
Yeah.
Tell us how many members, and there's some big stars in this class, and a huge change. We talked about women serving earlier. Unbelievable new crop of women leaders coming into the U.S. House and Senate, for that matter, but into leadership. So tell us a little bit about your class, and then the big news for Oklahoma. Out of all this class we're going to hear about, you just got elected as a freshman class president, which is it's a big deal normally, but with this size class, it's huge. So So we're so excited and proud of you. That's
you.
big.
Well, so the class is incredible. One of the things that you heard a lot about was the lack of diversity in the GOP, that we needed more diversity. This incoming freshman class, which right now is about 44, is incredible in the diversity that we have. There are 18 women that are coming in. To give your viewers a little context, there were 13 women, Republican GOP women, serving in the 116th Congress.
So there's more in the freshman class than were in the whole Congress previously, on the Republican side.
And I think there was a concerted effort to try to find more Republican women, given the sort of blue wave of 2018. We had more Republican women file for office than we ever had before, over 200 for congressional seats. So you have this amazing incoming class of women. You also have incredible diversity. Burgess Owens, former Super Bowl champion, football player out of Utah, African American. Byron Donalds out of Florida, African American. We have 2 from Miami area that are Cuban descent. You have Victoria Spartz out of Michigan, that is, Indiana, that is Ukrainian. So, it's really amazing. And we're all, trying to figure out, okay, how do we want to collaborate together? What do we want to do to make sure that we can make a difference for the country? And there's a couple of elected positions within the class. One of them is steering committee, which you help with committee assignments. One of them is freshman class president. And I sort of had this idea, maybe I'll run for freshman class president. And I sort of just decided one afternoon, I'm going to do that. And so I told some of my Texas freshman classmates, hey, I think I'm going to run for class president. And they said, we got this. So the Texas delegation, the new members down there, were very helpful in sort of saying, hey, she'd be great. We should get on board with her. And I was really, really blessed to be chosen by my classmates to represent the 117th freshman class.
So there's some good things out of Texas then, huh?
There are a few good things out of Texas. Yes, that is exactly right.
Well, I noticed in the, we always think of you as Stephanie Bice, Oklahoman, but part of the national coverage is centered on your Iranian roots. You mentioned the Ukrainian roots and the Hispanic roots of some of your classmates. So, you might. Some people are calling you Iranian American. Some calling you a Persian American.
Yeah.
But so that's another part of that diversity.
Sure. My father immigrated to this country in 1970, and so I am technically the first Iranian American ever elected to Congress. My father sort of gets upset with that because he said, "You're not Iranian American. You're American. I'm Iranian American." He's being an immigrant. I think it's for him it was a little bit of an interesting twist, but I have some perspective on the issues and the government, which is interesting because most people don't have a ton of insight into that. But I'm just excited to have the opportunity to serve Oklahoma. This is my home, and I have said for many years, I want to make this the very best place I can so that my daughters and their children want to live and work and be Oklahomans for as long as I can get them to stay.
Well, you mentioned the office lottery. That's always an important thing for new members of Congress. So do we know which office building you're going to be in when we come up to visit yet? Or?
Well, Rod, when you come to D.C., hopefully when we see the vaccine take hold and COVID-19 begins to decline and calm down, you can come to Longworth 1223, and that's where you will find the office of Representative Stephanie Bice. We had office lottery that first week in December, and I really didn't care what office I had. I do like Longworth, though, because it's right in the middle of the other 2 buildings. So it's kind of centrally located, and there's a Dunkin' Donuts in the basement. So
got our priorities. But is there a Brahms?
There's a Baskin Robbins right next to the Dunkin' Donuts. So and I have heard that the cafeteria is actually really great there. So there's some amenities that kind of go along with it.
Yeah. Have you found out the history of that office, of who's been in that office in the past? That's
Not
always
yet.
a fun. Okay, so
No.
That's the history you're yet to learn.
So for those that don't know, once you are assigned an office, you can actually email the architect of the Capitol, and they will send you a list of all of the members that have been in your office before you. So I haven't done that yet. I'm actually looking forward to finding out who resided in this office before me.
Well, after you get that list, you can get with Professor Tom Cole, and Tom will add a lot of historical data to go with that.
Well, and here's another thing that's kind of interesting. We didn't get to see the office before we chose it. We sort of saw a layout or a floor plan. And when I went to go see it in person, there's a freshman member that's there now. He was very gracious in letting me come in and look around. There's a huge safe in the member's office. And there's sort of this joke about what was the safe used for? And Congressman Cole actually told me, he said, we believe it was used back in the day when members would exchange cash for like elections. They didn't have any place to put the cash. This would have been in, decades ago, but they had no place to put the cash. And so they had safes put in their office so they could store all the campaign contributions in their offices.
Probably not a good idea to use it for that now.
No, definitely not. But that was an interesting kind of historical context.
Well, we talked about offices. One of the most important things for new members is committees.
Yes.
So do you know your committee assignments yet, or how soon will you know those, or what's that process like?
So we don't know committee assignments yet. That was maybe an interesting sort of dynamic for me. Once I got to DC for the first week of orientation, people started asking immediately, what committees do you want to be on? And I said, I just got elected 9 days ago. I haven't quite thought that far ahead. And the process is kind of a little bit arduous because you have to sort of figure out, okay, what can help the district? What slots are going to be open on committees? What we think will happen is that we're likely will not be assigned committees until after the first of the year. Leader McCarthy is negotiating with Speaker Pelosi on what we call ratios, which is the number of Republicans that are on a committee. Given that we picked up so many seats, Republicans picked up so many seats this cycle, Leader McCarthy is looking to try to get more slots on committees. And so once that negotiation happens, then we'll be able to figure out what committees we're going to be on. What I will share with viewers is that I have put in the request. You were required to do that last week for your preferences. And transportation and infrastructure is at the top of the list right now. You are not allowed to pick an A committee, and so those A committees are Ways and Means, Appropriations, Financial Services, and Energy and Commerce. So they were sort of off the table for the freshmen. So of the remaining ones, Transportation, Infrastructure, and Armed Services, HASC, were the two that I've put as preferences. HASC is important to CD5 because of all of the folks that, civilian and military, that work on Tinker. And transportation is important to all of us, especially to the ag community.
Well, and if we do end up with an infrastructure bill, which seems like every incoming administration always has big dreams of an infrastructure project, so that could be a significant point in time to be involved in that as well. So let's as we come to the close, let's talk about some issues for a minute. During the pandemic, one thing that's become very obvious is the disparity in broadband and internet capacity, and it's true even in the urban parts. There's gaps in the urban area, but particularly as you get to the fringes of your district and as you get outside of your district around the rest of the state, we have lots of kids that can't access their lessons now that we're in virtual schools in many cases, and we have lots of farmers that have farm equipment that can't really take advantage of all the options on that farm equipment without good internet, and lots of businesses that have troubles operating in different parts of our state if they don't have good internet. Have you got any thoughts on how we address these gaps in broadband and internet?
Well, it is certainly an issue, and it's interesting that you bring it up because I was actually having this conversation with my oldest daughter last night about opportunities for rural kids to have, let's say AP classes. We were discussing the fact that there may not be as many AP teachers in smaller communities to provide for a physics class or a chem class. And she said, I said maybe online would be an option. And she's actually the one that said, hey, but Mom, remember, they have a really tough time, connecting. There's a connectivity issue going on. I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that I'm hopeful for is improved technology can really help us bridge that gap. You've seen this conversation around 5G and small towers, becoming a lot more common. And my hope is that those types of platforms and the developing technology that we see will help, overcome that broadband issue, because it's definitely a concern when you have schools going virtual. Those kids need access, and if they're having to, download at slow speeds, it's cumbersome and ineffective. And it does affect outcomes. And so we have to be mindful of, on the federal level, what can we do to help spur innovation, develop those technologies, and then implement them in those communities that really, truly need it.
And since you've got a daughter studying engineering, she may be part of the solution as time goes ahead.
You never know. She's mechanical and aerospace, so it could be.
We've also had, for the farm community, whether it's farmers or ranchers, it's been a roller coaster, really for the last several years, with trade issues being so big and the impact that they've had on our commodities. But this last year, the disruptions in markets for the beef and many of our crops, it's been just a crazy roller coaster and a battle for survival for many of our folks. Any suggestions on how we tell our story, or how do we get you the information you need to help make decisions as we try to weave our way through these issues, or where do you turn to get input on these, and how can we help?
Well, I think, I have learned a lot about the ups and downs over the last several months. I mentioned my friend that's a rancher. He called me one day and was really frustrated because of some things that were happening in the packing side of things, and explained, the dynamics of that. And I didn't know that in order to sell cattle sort of retail, you had to have them USDA certified and approved, and that becomes really problematic when you don't have a lot of those individuals, and they're very expensive, so they tend to go to larger facilities. And so, I think there are some things that we can be doing to help ranchers, but also butcher shops and others, to be able to sell direct to market if they want to do that without having to do that individual transaction, which is what I just did, actually. I just bought a half a cow a couple weeks ago because I thought it was, why not? Let's make that happen. But I think that for me, it's going to be talking to people that are in the industry, talking to you all, but also talking to people that are on the ground, that are dealing in those arenas and struggling, and finding out what are the options, what can we do. As it relates to the beef issue, I had a great conversation with Senator Lankford about that. I know that he's been very engaged and really looking into some of the challenges that we've seen within the industry. So I want to be an open door, and certainly do as much of my due diligence to find out the information that's going to help make the best decision for the state.
What are some of the issues that you're hoping that you have on your mind that are going to be some of your priorities you're hoping to focus on in your freshman term as a Congresswoman?
Really the focus right now has to be jobs in the economy. We are still in this pandemic. We are seeing small businesses close at an accelerated rate. I've been frustrated that there are additional PPP dollars left over from the first CARES Act that went unused, that are not being able to be accessed right now. There's been what we call discharge petition circulating the U.S. House to force a vote to open up those remaining dollars to small businesses to utilize. And all it takes is a majority of the body to be able to force a vote on that issue. But Democrats are unwilling to sign on, and have been for several months now. And I think it's really frustrating for those business owners that have been able to kind of limp along, but they're still really hurting. So I want to make sure that I'm looking at economy and jobs as we move forward. The vaccine being rolled out last week, and now I think there's a new one that's going to be coming out next week. We are hopeful we'll see some turnaround in the pandemic, summertime, maybe see things return to normal. But in the meantime, we have got to get a relief package done. We've got to get small business relief to those businesses that continue to suffer, and keep people employed.
Of course, those of us in agriculture, we're ultimately in the food and fiber and business, and so we have to care about the food chain all the way from the farm to the restaurant or the grocery store, and because the consumer consumes it in different ways. But it's been, we look at the damage that's being done to the hotel business, the convention center businesses, the restaurants, the mom and pop restaurants. It's pretty stunning, and that's our customers for those of us in agriculture. And so we we have a stake too in what happens to all those businesses. And so
yeah, I mean, you all saw it firsthand when everything shut down in March. All of a sudden, restaurants aren't buying, hotels aren't. People are going to the grocery store and there's limited quantities of things. Supply chain was impacted drastically, and so we have to really think through how do we ensure that we can overcome those situations in the future.
And we mentioned earlier, but great expertise we have in our delegation. I just want to, Frank Lucas, of course, on agricultural matters, he's still a working farmer, or at least he takes credit for a lot of what Linda Lucas does.
I would say that is actually true. However, I did call him last week, and he was actually working cattle that afternoon. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. So we know he does make occasional visits to the farm.
Yes.
He's really hands-on. So if we or other farmers and ranchers you trust aren't handy to give you input, we would encourage you to check with Frank Lucas and listen to Frank Lucas, because he's usually going to be pretty right on ag things. And one of the reasons we're excited to have you at Congress is because that increases the likelihood that we'll get folks like Frank Lucas back into committee chairs and Tom Cole back into committee chairs and leadership, because we have this amazing talent. And then you've got a couple folks that are not freshmen anymore, but that are a couple classes ahead of you in Hearn and Mullins, that also, we just have so much talent that if at some point the leadership flips again, we'll have real leaders of Congress out of our delegations. So.
Exactly right, and I think that's a focus for McCarthy. The Republicans were not expected to pick up any seats. As a matter of fact, right before the election, you were hearing we're going to lose 5, 10, maybe even 15 seats on the Republican side. So to pick up seats and not lose a single incumbent on the GOP side was pretty remarkable. And now we're looking at the smallest majority for Democrats since World War II. And we believe that there's a great opportunity for us to be able to retake the House in 2 years. So that's going to be a focus, is making sure that we're fighting for Oklahoma, fighting for this country when it comes to the economy, jobs. We talked about transportation infrastructure, healthcare. Those are going to be important topics that'll come up over the next 2 years. And then it'll be really a focus on trying to retake the House.
Our kind of last question, we have a Biden administration now that he's prevailed over in the Electoral College over President Trump, and we still have Democrat majority in the House, although much slimmer. How are you going to work with a Democrat administration and with Democrat House leadership? How do we work together to get some things done for our country going forwards?
Yeah, I've done that on the state level. Although we had a supermajority in both chambers and a Republican governor, I have found issues that are really, nonpartisan to be able to work on. Now, certainly, I'm going to champion conservative issues. That's just who I am and what I've done on the state level. But there are things that we can get done. It's not going to be easy. And I think that having the U.S. Senate will be a stopgap in some ways for pushing forward maybe policies that are really detrimental to Oklahoma. But it's going to be a lot of work. What I was reminded in new member orientation is that relationships are everything, and I think that building those relationships, even with our Democrat freshmen, there's 15 Democrat freshmen that are coming in with our class. Building those relationships and having some dialogue, even with people that I am vehemently, on opposite sides of an issue, can lend itself to, finding some commonalities and being able to work together. But it'll take work.
Probably the biggest change that we're worried about from an agricultural perspective is a change at the EPA and on greenhouse gases with the change, John Kerry and the leadership at the White House that's going to be probably pushing the envelope on a lot of these environmental and green issues, where under Trump we'd had an environmental agency that was trying to work with industry and with agriculture, probably a little bit more confrontational approach again. Any words of wisdom or insight as we try to deal with those challenges?
I think you all have proven yourselves to be the original environmentalists. Farmers and ranchers know how to take care of the land and the environment better than anyone, I think. And so I think utilizing you as a resource to maybe push back on some of the narratives that we've been hearing about, some of the progressives are wanting to push Green New Deal scenarios, which are actually incredibly expensive and very harmful to the economy. And so I think educating people on the true impacts of making some of those changes is going to be incredibly important, so they understand the impacts to states like Oklahoma, should they want to ban greenhouse gas emissions in certain ways, or ban fracking, the things that we've been hearing about.
We've covered a lot of different subjects. It's been just an absolutely wonderful visit today, and I think it'll help our members have a lot better insight into who is Congresswoman Stephanie Bice as they get to know her, and we look forward to working with you for many years to come. Are there any closing comments or any thoughts that we haven't covered you'd like to address today?
Well, I just want to say it's an honor to be elected to this position, and I'm really excited for the opportunity to work with you, the Oklahoma Farm Bureau, and the members to really make sure that I have the resources and knowledge to do what's great for Oklahoma. It's going to be a fast and furious couple weeks until swearing in, and then it'll be off to the races.
Well, today everyone's gotten to see the newest bright, shiny star that we have in the Oklahoma Congressional Delegation, and we're so excited to have Congresswoman Stephanie Bice join us today, and we look forward to working with her throughout her freshman term the next 2 years and for many, many terms to come. So we appreciate her access during her time at the State Senate and be willing to, even if we didn't always agree on something, we knew we could always visit with her and that she would listen to us and share her insight, and we look forward to that same and even better relationship as we work together on federal issues in Washington, D.C. So, Stephanie, thank you again so much for being here today. Thank you all for tuning in and watching today, and we wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and we'll look forward to visiting with you again soon with another member of our congressional delegation. This is Rodd Moesel with Oklahoma Farm Bureau saying Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.